going on, everybody? Welcome back to the 31 Days of Horror. I am your host, Mood616, and thank you once again for stopping in, guys. Yes, 31 Days of Horror, Volume 9, Day 6. Of course, is coming at you live and direct. All right, so we're going to leave the States, and we're going to head over to Iceland. Now, Iceland is a country that I can honestly not think of too many films that were like, you know, totally Icelandic type horror films. I know there's some out there. I believe I think Lamb might be one that came out a couple years ago. But, you know, the history of horror in Iceland can't be that deep. I know there's a lot of films that were filmed there, but movies that were actually like, you know, homegrown and actually shot there and stuff like that, I can't think of too many. It's interesting. But Lamb comes to mind, actually, now that I think about it. But anyways, so the film in question today, we're going to take it all the way back to 1987 with a film called Tilbury. And it's from the All Haunts We Are's Volume 1 box set. Actually, when I was pulling out the film to watch it, I realized it was actually the film on the other side of the same disc that I did last year, Lake of the Dead. So I had done that film. I think that was a Swedish one, I think, or something. That was a pretty cool film. So yeah, so Tilbury from 1987. Of course, is a folk horror film. And yeah. So basically, the premise of this film is it follows our main character, Audrin, I think is what his name is. Not 100% sure on how to pronounce it, but I think it's Audrin, something like that. And anyways, he's just kind of like your everyday dude. You know, this movie's actually set in 1940 during World War I. He's like an everyday dude, but anyways, he ends up helping out on this British Army training base. Because he needs some work or whatever, and he's helping out there and stuff like that, doing his thing. Because of course, in World War II, Iceland was neutral, so they had taken up with no part of any allies and stuff. So the British set up shop there. They're just doing some training exercises, whatever. So, anyways, he's like working on this base and stuff like that. Anyways, he starts thinking about this girl that he once knew when he was younger and stuff like that. In fact, her father's actually asked him to kind of check up on her and stuff. So he's trying to locate her, and he does. And he's kind of fancying her again and stuff like that. He kind of wants to be with her because he really likes her. But then he realizes that she's actually getting all hugged up with one of like the British soldiers, and she's kind of fraternizing with one of the British soldiers. And so he's kind of getting a little anxious about that. He doesn't really know what to do about it and stuff like that. So he starts getting curious. So he kind of follows them around and stuff. And he finds them one night in the cemetery, and things just don't appear to be correct. And he soon realizes that the relationship is not really that normal. And yeah, so it just kind of goes from there. Anyways, that's the premise to the film. So my thoughts on Tilbury. Now, Tilbury is an Icelandic folk horror story tale that I think started way back in like maybe the 1600s or something like that. I was very unfamiliar with this. I had never heard of this. In fact, I really wish that they would do more films based on this folklore, because this is a really weird one. So in the beginning of the film, they explain what a Tilbury is. So it's called Tilbury, but essentially you make a Tilbury. And essentially what this is, it's like, so you can make a Tilbury, which is kind of like this small, like little demon creature that can take human form. And how you make this is a woman, or basically a witch, takes the bone of a deceased male, wraps it in wool, puts it between her boobs, and then spits like church wine on it to like create this Tilbury. And now the purpose of the Tilbury is to go out and feed off cows, and get their milk, to bring it back to her, and where they basically puke it up. And the point of this is so she can use it to make butter. And I'm like, okay. And in return for, this kind of demon creature doing this good deed, she feeds it her blood through a nipple that's on the inside of her thigh. No, I am not making any of this up. This is the craziest thing. And I was like, instantly when they give me this kind of prelude to the film, I was like so engulfed, and I'm like, that is the weirdest storyline I've ever heard. It's crazy. So, and kind of use your imagination, to what's happening here within the film and stuff like that. So I thought this is really cool. So I'm watching the film, I'm like really enjoying this shit. And I just kind of gave a time check, and I was like, holy shit, this thing's only an hour long. Then I looked into it, and I guess it was like a made-for-TV film in 1987. It was very controversial, given obviously the content of the film is very bizarre and very strange, and it gets pretty dark towards the end and stuff like that too, so I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, to my amazement, it was only an hour long. And like I said, there's not a lot of films coming from Iceland, but to have this one come from there is really cool. I kept thinking to myself after I finished it, I was like, damn, I would really like to see an updated version of this story, you know, like an epic, like hour and a half, 2 hour movie with this storyline, because it's just so unique. I think there's a lot more you could do with it. Even though I really liked the whole film, I thought it was a really interesting idea. Actually, the girl that plays the love interest, the witch, or whatever you want to call it, I think her name is, I don't even know, I can't pronounce her name. She's really beautiful in the film too, and it was like perfect because she was super desirable, and it's like you kind of have this like this threesome thing happening where you've got like this demon and stuff, and then you got him, and it's actually really interesting. Now the film obviously is just, it's made for the fact of, you know, there's tons of commentary and stuff like that. I think without doing too much research on it, I didn't really look into it a whole lot. I'm just going to kind of use my imagination as to what it is. But I'm assuming the commentary has to do with probably a lot of the insecurities and the anxieties of like the Icelandic people, you know, having like soldiers in their land where they were a neutral country and stuff like that. And I think it created a lot of problems too, because I know this happened in a bunch of different areas where soldiers would come into a country and they would fraternize with the people, and it would just create like a whole pile of shit. And I think if you're from Iceland and you're like, you know, just a normal dude, you don't want your people, you know, getting all hooked up with other people and shit. I think that's kind of what it is, because I feel like during the war there was a lot of anxieties based on, hey, it could end up over here, it could not. You don't really know what's going to happen in the war and stuff like that, and you kind of feel like you need to hold on to your own, where if they're off getting all hugged up with British soldiers and American soldiers and stuff like that, then it could cause a lot of problems and stuff. So I think that's kind of what they're exploring here, to be honest. And I thought it was actually really well done. There's some really interesting scenes. In fact, there's actually scenes where she actually makes chocolate out of the butter. It's like Cadbury chocolate and stuff like that. And that kind of plays into the whole subplot into the film, or subplot, like the core narrative in the film too, I guess you kind of call it, I guess. But really interesting stuff. Like I said, it just ran a little bit too short for myself. Like, I was blown away. This thing was only like 56 or 57 minutes long. I was like, holy shit, I had no idea until I was like halfway done. There was literally 20 minutes left, and I felt like, I'm like, is this thing wrapping up? And I'm like, what? There's only 20 minutes left? Crazy. So I felt like it could have been a lot more extended, but again, made for TV. Maybe that's how they made films back in the day and stuff like that. I thought it looked really good. It actually feels very timeless also, because it's shot on 60 millimeter. It looks really good. I thought the wardrobes and the set design, or the locations and the costume designs and everything were really authentic looking. It looked really good for a TV film. Kind of blown away. I'm assuming quite low budget, considering it was only an hour long, but they did a lot with that low budget, and they created kind of a timeless piece, which I really enjoy. Really, really good stuff. But yeah, this one gets really fucking dark, and it's kind of nasty too, man. There's some nasty shit. Like, there's this one scene where at first, like, before you have this like full-on reveal, there's this dude that's in this like hot tub, and he's like floating in it, and our main character walks in, he's kind of looking around, he sees him floating in it, and he sees some chocolate, and he sees like some Chivas Regal, like some whiskey and stuff like that, and all of a sudden the guy gets out of the pool, and he fucking just projectile vomit, like total Exorcist style. It's all green, like all over him and shit. And I'm just like, what the fuck? I was like, that is absolutely ridiculous. But now coming thinking back to what I thought about the commentary, there was actually a scene in the film where there was another what the fuck moment, where it kind of transitions to a scene where you see a bunch of soldiers kind of doing their rounds on top of this building, and there's a guy in the driver's seat of this vehicle, and he's just kind of sitting in there smoking, and you realize there's two people in the back seat like getting it on. You're like, what the fuck? And I literally said that out loud. I'm like, what the fuck? But then I started thinking, I was like, oh, that probably playing into the whole commentary and stuff like that. So it isn't really what the fuck moment if you're thinking about that. So but overall, you know, I mean, for a TV film, it's not overly gory and stuff, but it has a lot of disturbing like imagery and stuff. Like seeing big ass nipples on the inside of women's legs and shit is pretty wild, and actually seeing somebody sucking on it and shit, and then it gets, like I said, really dark and kind of violent towards the end and shit, and there's a reason for it and stuff, and yeah, it was just, it was really fantastic. I thought it was really, really well done. I just wanted a lot more. It's just too bad it wasn't longer, but man, if someone doesn't know about this folklore and is interested in making a folklore film, man, look it up, man. This could be something pretty cool, I think. I think you could do a lot with the idea for sure. So, pretty cool stuff. So, man, the All Haunts Be Ours box set is fantastic. 20 films. I've pretty much watched the majority. There's about 4 or 5 I haven't watched in here, but I'm really glad that I checked this one out because I was just looking for kind of different countries to explore, and I was like, oh man, there's a film from Iceland in here. I'm like, that's crazy, because like I said, they're just not overly that common. There's films that are shot there, but there's not just a lot of, you know, actual produced and, you know, homebred Icelandic films. So, but yeah, I'm going to come in at about an 8 out of 10 on it. I thought it was really well done. Again, it's one of those pieces where, you know, it just feels very authentic. You know, I love the costumes. It was fantastic. So good stuff. Good stuff. So Tilbury from 1987. Check it out. If you have the set, or I'm sure you can probably find it somewhere. It's probably streaming somewhere or whatever. But anyways, guys, that's going to do it here for day 6. Be back with day 7. And I think I remember what I'm doing tomorrow. And it's going to be a blast. Because it's actually going to be a rewatch for me. I wanted to pull out some films I hadn't seen in a long time for this 31 days. A lot of times I will mostly do just first time watches, but this year I kind of felt like pulling out some that I had seen. But yeah, tomorrow's going to be one that I actually have seen, but I've seen it years ago. We're talking, I probably haven't seen it in like 15 years. So, but it is crazy. So stay tuned for that one. So anyways, guys, that's going to conclude day 6. See you guys tomorrow on day 7. And as usual,